Hi, I'm Craig Smith, a former New York Times correspondent and host of the podcast Eye on AI. I'm also a special government employee at the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, and in this role, I'm serving as the host for NSCAI's podcast series on the Commission's work. This is the second episode of 6, looking at the Commission's third quarter recommendations to Congress. This week, I speak with Jose-Marie Griffiths, an NSCAI commissioner, about her line of efforts recommendations to make a variety of bureaucratic changes that will open AI-related career pathways for government employees, and to increase STEM-related educational funding by $8 billion in order to prime the pump for an AI-ready workforce. I hope you find the conversation as interesting as I did. Okay, so your line of efforts recommendations this quarter include a variety of funding allocations, many of them relatively small, to support development of an AI-literate digital workforce, which has been one of the goals of the Commission. And your recommendations include funding allocations for the Air Force Digital Academy and the Navy Community College. Can you talk holistically about that funding and the institutions that need support?
Yes, certainly. The US government already has several promising AI, data science, and software development workforce initiatives, either planned or in the early phases of implementation. And while many of those programs don't focus solely on AI, they all address technologies needed to enable AI, such as data management, electrical engineering, and software. So we operated with the principle do no harm when it came to making recommendations, and creating new programs without awareness of current AI initiatives would be redundant and actually slow the pace of change. So we thought it important to highlight those existing programs that the services started to help draw attention to the good work already being done in AI. And we acknowledge that we aren't the only people thinking about AI. So there's a set of recommendations that really says, yeah, these are good initiatives, and we endorse them and recommend that they be funded.
And so the funding allocations that you're recommending here are intended to be incremental to whatever other funding those institutions have already gotten?
No, actually, what we're recommending is the funding that's already being requested by those other entities. We're just endorsing their recommendations, basically.
I see. Okay. And with the proposed U.S. Digital Service Academy that the Commission has put forward, are there enough initiatives at this point to meet the government's needs?
Well, the Commission realizes that the scale of the workforce problems facing the United States government is massive. Many of those issues are persistent, and we believe a holistic approach to changing the government workforce is necessary. So these recommendations represent specific areas which, if enacted, would greatly improve the U.S. government's workforce both now and in the future. It's actually quite difficult to quantify the shortage of AI knowledge in the government for two reasons. First, the government doesn't have a system for measuring or tracking its AI knowledge, and some of our first quarter recommendations are designed to help resolve that issue. Second, the government has only started to explore what it will do with AI. And as the government builds its workforce, and particularly as parts of the national security world develop unique needs, it will gain a better understanding of its workforce requirements. What we can say with certainty is that there is a severe shortage. Our commissioners and staff have interviewed hundreds of government officials, and two of the most consistent messages are that the government doesn't have enough technical talent, and that government leaders need to better understand AI, its potential and its limitations, and what their organizations need to do to build up AI capabilities. So just for clarity's sake, the goal of the US Digital Service Academy is to produce digitally proficient civilian employees. The programs we endorsed in Q3 were programs within the military services.
I see. Yeah. Thanks for the clarification, because I actually missed that. And what you're saying is the need is not one fix. that the demand for a technically literate workforce is not going to be solved by one group of programs. It's a rolling demand that will change as technology develops. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, we can think about how technology has evolved. And so more and more of everything that we do in life engages with technology in some way, more and more capabilities. And now we're seeing more and more competition for the same qualified people. So building the workforce is going to be important. It's going to be a long-term issue as technologies evolve and as needs and applications change. So the federal government is going to be in this for quite some time to come.
Yeah. And when you talked about the need for senior leadership to be literate so that they can recognize areas that need attention and that sort of thing, do you think that's really a generational change? Because it is difficult for people in their 50s and 60s to suddenly become literate in something as technical as artificial intelligence or machine learning. Is it going to take longer than a few years to really transform the workforce?
That's an interesting question. I actually think it is going to take a few years, but I think then we're going to see waves and waves of young people coming through their education, having that awareness and understanding. And basically then it will be, what's changing, what's evolving, how are emerging technologies still emerging, new emerging technologies over time. But I think that leaders need to know enough to be able to question the experts that are doing the work in their areas. It's not sufficient, for example, for even a CEO of a company not to be able to ask questions of their technical personnel. So you need to know enough to know what to ask, what can happen, how this could be helpful to what you're trying to do, and where the pitfalls are in potentially using technology or applying technology.
And some of the other recommendations address the measurement issue of trying to identify where we are in the technical literacy of the government and the services. There are recommendations to talk about creating new occupational series and career fields relevant to increasing the integration of AI into national security. I'm certainly not familiar with government bureaucracy, and I'm sure many of our listeners are not. I assume those are budget categories. Can you explain to listeners what occupational series and career field mean and how you envision those mechanisms being used?
Yes, they're not really budget categories per se. The occupational series would look at the kinds of career positions that would exist. For example, I'm a university president. We use the occupational series when we are trying to justify a new degree program, for example, and the occupational series will tell us what kinds of job roles are being created relating to an area, in this instance, artificial intelligence. What kinds of jobs are going to be there and how many of what kinds of jobs are needed. And then we would be able to say to our governance structure, well, we know that they're going to be increasing numbers of jobs in artificial intelligence, and we want to create a degree program that addresses these needs. But in the government, these occupational series are used by the human resources organizations to define the actual positions that people would hold. So we have occupational series that have multiple roles, and career fields are what people are able to develop throughout their careers. So that the US government civilians currently don't have career paths outside of R&D that allow them to focus on software development, data science, or artificial intelligence for the majority of their careers. So this results in a highly limited ability to recruit talent from outside of government, an inability for individuals to focus on a skill set for an extended period of time, a lack of continuing education opportunities for these government civilians, and then, of course, retention issues. So it causes the government to struggle to identify and manage the software development, data science, and AI talent within its workforce. A digitally focused occupational series would better allow the government to track and manage its digital workforce and attract new talent that wants to focus on a technical skill set and then create new positions that relate to the newly emerging technical skill sets. While creating occupational series in themselves will make it easier for agencies to create digital positions, it won't alone create billets for digital experts to fill. And creating these billets requires what we call a demand signal for leaders. What do they need? It's also worth noting that experts need access to modern software tools to perform their jobs effectively. If they're denied access to these tools, many experts will leave or never actually come into the government. And while this isn't directly a talent management issue, it will have a major impact on the government's ability to recruit and retain experts.
Can you give an example, first of all, of a job or a career path? Because certainly the demand for someone to develop work on AI development exists. But without this HR structure, without occupational series, career fields, and coded billets, can you give an example of a job or a career path, how it would develop without those structures?
We said in our first report that the government has great difficulty knowing that people have various areas of digital expertise. So we don't know, there's no way of knowing in the military, for example, how many individuals have actually done coding or any kind of software development or any kind of data management or algorithm development, you name it. We have no way of knowing. Occasionally we'll see people, they find their way to an assignment that leverages those capabilities, but they're not able to do career work in those areas. So the idea of billets is what allows people to do that. And let me just explain what billets are. In a way, a billet is a specialized slot or a place to which one can be assigned. There's a historical use of the term. It was for an assigned place for military personnel to sleep. So, for example, my father was in the British Army in World War II. His army job, was a forward artillery spotter. But in the late stages of the war, he was billeted to a house that actually belonged to my mother's family. So his billeting didn't change his primary role, but that's where at the end of the day, he went to sleep. And so in that sense, it is a place where you can go for periods of time. So to properly select, acquire, and integrate emerging technologies within the DoD, we want to increase the number of military officers who are proficient in various emerging technologies. And so billets are a way for military leaders to first become emerging technology qualified by demonstrating proficiency, and then to fill critical specialized assignments that require emerging technologies expertise. So this expertise may be in artificial intelligence, in machine learning, in quantum computing, in robotics, or in another frontier area that the DoD hopes to incorporate into operations. So we recommend that these designated billets only be filled by officers who've taken steps such as participating in emerging tech fellowships or talent exchanges, served in emerging tech positions in government, and completing courses focused on emerging technologies. So this will ensure adequate background for the unique challenges that come with fielding deeply technical and scientific endeavors. The billets should exist within any organization that will be heavily impacted by emerging technologies, not just the ones that are creating or directly integrating emerging tech. So on the one hand, we need the occupational series to define the positions and jobs, and then we need specialized billets where people can go to leverage the expertise that they have developed in the emerging technologies areas. And then we hope that we will be able to create career paths where people will be able to have careers in AI or in data management or in quantum computing or whatever else during their military careers.
And so without that, for example, Project Maven that Jack Shanahan pulled together, that would have been done on a relatively small scale through relationships that the leader has with various people, and you would pull together a team through those relationships. Whereas now, or presuming that these recommendations are implemented, it'll make it much easier for a senior leader to pull together a team on a particular project because you just pull people with those billets and
you pull people into those billets, but we are also recommending that the personnel system of DoD includes a variety of identifiers, and we want those identifiers to be able to mark people as having competence, designated competence and capability in various emerging technologies areas. So that's the other piece to this. I mean, it is complex. I mean, the DoD system, the federal system generally, is very complex and very different from the private sector.
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is some of these are intended to allow someone to pursue a career path But if someone wants to pursue a career path and there is the need, even without these structures, they should be able to. Or is the bureaucracy so rigid that you really need these structures to open the way?
No, you really need the structures because there's no career progression for people in these technical areas. And that's the concern. I mean, that's why you would see people ultimately leave or maybe not even come into the government workforce because they don't see what the career progression is. You advance in terms of, particularly with the military, you advance in terms of your primary military responsibility and work through that system. You may have special expertise and you may be pulled in to fill a billet for a while, but you aren't progressed on the basis of that special expertise. So that's why we want to create a series of additional identifiers, as they're called, so that people can have those additional skills actually recognized and be part of their progression through their careers.
And those identifiers, they will appear in the HR dossiers for each individual, is that right? Or are they a string of letters that will follow your name on your business card, so to speak?
At the risk of going into the arcane in the military, there are a variety of different identifiers. So, for example, they have additional skill identifiers, additional qualification identifiers, additional military occupational specialties or special experience identifiers. And these are really certifications that the military can earn, typically by completing a course that show they're able to perform certain tasks. So I'll give you an example. Soldiers receive an additional skill identifier, the letter P, after earning their parachutist badge, allowing them to participate in airborne operations. Personnel systems can review additional skill identifiers to track and manage skill sets. So certain certifications or associated training are either required or highly preferred for many positions, and personnel with these certifications are managed by their primary branch, not by a central organization in charge of personnel with that certification. So we recommend that the military services create or purchase training for certifications and continuing education in the following areas: artificial intelligence mission engineering, data engineering, safety and responsible AI engineering, and AI hardware technician. So that would be a way then those people would automatically have those certifications attached to their personnel record. And then people looking for people with certain skills to fill billets can in fact find them more easily than they can right now.
I see. And also that would allow the government at a higher level to measure where it is in developing a technologically literate workforce.
Exactly. How many people do we have? And it will give the individual the opportunity to pursue additional certifications, particularly in areas where they believe there's going to be additional need. So I think it works both for the individual as well as for the military and the government as a whole.
Well, that's fascinating to me. I'm not sure if it's fascinating to everybody, but well, it's interesting to understand how the government or the military bureaucracies work. The recommendations talk about using AI to curate curriculum content and tailor the delivery of that content to individual users. That sounded to me like an AI tutoring system. Has the Commission considered commercially available systems? I know there's one system out there that was developed for the Navy. It's now a private company.
Well, all the way through, we've recommended that the government look for existing examples of systems that can help them build the workforce, whether that be course content or systems like tutoring systems. We think that they should take a look to see what's out there, and if something meets the need, they should go ahead and acquire it. But in particular, we were looking at an application that the Defense Acquisition University is looking at. So they're looking at AI curated content that can tailor the learning experience to a student's function and individual role within the DoD acquisition workforce, but also account for student preferences in both the medium in which they consume educational content and their pattern of behavior in acquiring content. So content that naturally builds on prior content, for example, would automatically appear in an appropriate sequence to an individual student. It might not always be the same sequence. If a student is experiencing difficulties with a particular area or subset of content, then additional reinforcing content or examples or exercises could be delivered until the student has demonstrated competence in that area. And content could be also delivered to match the preferred cadence of learning, nightly, weekly, monthly, and so on. With AI curated training, a curriculum can automatically then and seamlessly incorporate materials that update often, such as industry best practices and case studies. And this minimizes disruptions for the learner while reducing the amount of manual updating work required of course developers. The Defense Acquisition University could utilize commercial sector materials that they could leverage for their students. As it currently stands, the Defense Acquisition University, DAU, has begun pilot programs aiming to use AI to both curate existing DoD acquisitions workforce curriculum content, as well as to tailor the delivery of that content to individual users. If successful, this approach could not only allow for more rapid tailoring and updating of content, but allow for individual students to receive DoD acquisitions workforce training that best aligns to their individual positions, roles, and functions within the DoD workforce, as well as to the specific level of program that they specifically support. This approach could also allow for a better understanding of the modality of training delivery to tailor content delivery differently for each student. By using AI-selected and tailored training sessions, acquisition training course developers could provide the most up-to-date materials and ensure that industry best practices, government acquisition lessons learned, and other dynamically changing materials could be easily and rapidly incorporated to keep training materials relevant in a much more rapid timescale than can be done today.
So is this a system or an AI model that the Defense Acquisition University has already acquired, or is it one that's being built within the U.S. government?
They are initiating a pilot program. And we think it's an intriguing pilot program. We don't know if it's going to work the way it could, but if it is and is successful, then that approach could be adapted to a wide variety of different training opportunities.
Yeah. I mean, I'm particularly interested in this AI tutoring. Is the pilot program implementing an existing commercial system, or is the pilot program implementing a system that has been developed within the military? It's interesting because, as I said, there's a company out there called Acuitas who developed an AI tutor initially to train naval systems administrators. And it's proven to train systems administrators at a much more concentrated timeline than with human tutors. And then there's a company called Reed out of Korea that's recently signed a deal with Kaplan that has an AI tutoring system that, again, has been shown to be better than human tutors in English language instruction, for example, but the same principles can be used to teach anything. So this whole field is developing. That's why I'm wondering how much the government is building on its own as opposed to buying in from the private sector.
Yeah, we were intrigued by the fact that this was a pilot that I believe is just really starting, but it was one of the few projects that we've seen for using AI within the education and training function within the federal government at the moment. So we thought that would be intriguing, but as I say, it's not a fully functioning pilot yet, so we don't really know of the actual result of their preliminary work.
You recommend $8 billion in funding over 5 years for STEM scholarships, fellowships, and postdoctoral positions. How much does the government spend on those for those sorts of scholarships, fellowships, and postdoctoral positions now?
Well, according to a Congressional Research Service 2018 report, annual federal appropriations for STEM education are typically in the range of $2.8 to $3.4 billion. So that's annually. The published inventories identify the Department of Education, the National Science Foundation, and the Department of Health and Human Services as key agencies in the federal effort. Over half of federal STEM education funding is intended to serve the needs of post-secondary schools and students, and the remainder goes to efforts at the K12 educational level. And much of the funding for post-secondary students is in the form of financial aid, including fellowships and grants. So by their estimate, the US spends between $1.4 and $2.7 billion on STEM scholarships and fellowships.
Wow. And that $8 billion, that would be in addition to the current funding.
Yes.
So that would be not for federal programs, that would be out in the educational community.
Yeah, various scholarships, some of which we've recommended, a scholarship for service models, fellowships for graduate students, and then postdoctoral positions. I think we put in a lot of very, very specific recommendations in this quarter, but they really build on and sort of round out the recommendations that we've made in the previous quarters. So we've been sort of taking various bites of the apple. We had a number of recommendations in the first quarter. We had only 3 recommendations in the second quarter, but they were big, bold ones. And now we're sort of coming in and saying, well, if we're going to do this, we really need to have these other things done. So we're looking at the future in this quarter, some of those things that the federal government really needs to put in place if it intends to have the kind of impact on the workforce that they need to have. We did say with our second quarter recommendations, incremental change isn't going to get us there. We won't get to the scale that's needed. And it's no longer just in artificial intelligence. It's in all those supporting technologies that are coming along, quantum computing, microelectronics, 5G, all of these underlying technological areas are going to be very important to the ability to deploy an appropriately qualified AI-ready workforce. We really can't sit back. And, we can look at things that are coming forward. We look at STEM education quite broadly. The United States is losing ground internationally. And so we can't just do the same thing, and we can't even do the same thing at the same level. We've got to really ramp up activities within the federal government. So we think that the recommendations we've made address different aspects of the environment in which the federal government is going to have to operate in the future. And if it wishes to be competitive, it's going to have to make some changes pretty quickly.
Actually, you touched on something on the U.S. falling behind. The U.S. has for a long time been a magnet for, particularly in STEM education, for some of the best and the brightest around the world. That's changing, certainly right now because of the pandemic, but it's changing because other countries are improving the provision of education at home, or there are competing markets, Australia, the UK, for those same students. So the US is no longer the only place that students can go to get that education. And there has been, for quite a while now, a decrease or decline in interest in STEM education among domestic students. Can you talk a little bit about the causes for why the U.S. would be falling behind other countries, or not necessarily falling behind, but losing its dominant role that it enjoyed for such a long time?
I think there are a number of reasons, and again, they're quite complex. I do believe that in the post-secondary world, we do have some of the best programs in the world, and particularly in terms of the numbers of programs that we have. But I think we don't get enough people coming into the higher education system wanting to develop careers in STEM. So there have been a number of reasons for that. I believe that STEM has not been made the kind of priority it needs to be made in the K-12 levels. I think we have a number of teachers who teach STEM courses in the K-12 environment who are not fully qualified, are not confident in teaching them. And I just think that we've created various pathways for young people to come into the STEM careers. But if you look at the numbers of university graduates in the United States in the STEM careers, the number of domestic graduates relative to incoming foreign graduates, it's falling behind even there. And increasing numbers of our foreign graduates are repatriating and going home to build the STEM environment in their countries. So I think we have to see STEM generally and emerging technologies as absolutely key areas to engage people in and make it a priority. And that means that not only does this have to be a national priority, but the states have to make it a priority as well. And then how do we encourage more people to come in? And, right now, the private sector is able to move very nimbly and agilely to recruit people. Many of the STEM graduates, particularly the technologically astute graduates, are hired by the time they get to their senior year of college. Very often they get substantial signing bonuses. That's no longer the purview of the law students. And they're going out into technology companies to do very exciting things. The federal government is somewhat behind the curve there. It's a large bureaucracy. It tends to operate by the rules and regulations it's had. It has opportunities to extend beyond the more common hiring practices to exception practices, but those exception practices are not typically used as much as they could. So I do think it's a question of priority, and it's a question of having their priorities flow entirely through the educational system so that everybody recognizes that this is important, not just for young people and careers, but for the state of our nation going forward.
I'm curious why the K through 12 debt forgiveness and some of these other things didn't go through. And there has been talk about K through 12 in the past in the commission's recommendations, but that really, you really do need to prime the pump. Otherwise, you're relying increasingly on international talent coming into the country.
Yeah, well, the way the commission works is that the lines of effort go and pursue a research agenda for a quarter, and we come back and we develop recommendations, and those recommendations are then passed around so that every line of effort sees every other line of effort's recommendations. And then we come together in a plenary and we present the recommendations and we talk about them, and we determine whether we have consensus on the recommendations or not. And there were a couple of questions raised about the K through 12 recommendations that I think need a little bit more discussion and context for some of the members of the commission. And I think we'll get back to it because, as you say, it's an important area. And as a university president, we're at the end of that line. And we know that there are multiple pathways for young people to get into careers. So we had some recommendations on community colleges. We had some recommendations on career technical education, but the K through 12 was a little different, and we just have to sit down and explain a little bit more why our recommendations were being developed and have further discussion among the commissioners on that. So I'm hoping that our final report will get back and have some recommendations in that arena.
And certainly the commission, its mandate is focused higher up the chain, and it isn't the only organization that's looking at K through 12 STEM education.
No, exactly. But I think one of the questions is, what do we do in the K through 12 arena? Those of us in STEM education, in higher education, will say it's not sufficient just for us to focus our attention on helping high school students get the courses that they need in order to come into the university system. We always say, if you don't get into the middle school curriculum, then the students will often graduate from middle school and they'll already be behind in their ability to catch up to move into a STEM career if they don't have a certain level of math, for example. So then the question comes about, if you think about the last 15, 20 years in STEM education, we've had a lot of new things laid upon us. We've got this massive need for cybersecurity professionals, still a large number of cybersecurity professionals needed. We're going to have an increasing number of artificial intelligence people needed. We're going to have people in microelectronics and quantum computing, etc. So all of this is growing. And all of that then begins to put pressure down through the K through 12 system. So the area I know best is cybersecurity. And with cybersecurity, we know that even in kindergarten now, there are some kindergartners in some schools, in some countries, taught about digital hygiene. You have a password, don't do this, don't change your password, don't share your password, don't tell other people about it. So we have curricula for digital hygiene / cybersecurity addressed to each age level. That's been developed and adopted sometimes. My neighboring state of Iowa, for example, has adopted a cybersecurity K through 12 curriculum. We also see a need, we've been talking a lot, and I think it was in our first report, the importance of computational thinking, the approach that young people need to develop to meeting a problem, thinking about a problem, working in teams to try and dissect a problem, find some potential solutions or ideate on different solutions, find out what works, put it together, test it out, etc. That whole approach to solving problems and to learning rather than, the old-fashioned rote learning becomes very much the kind of thing that's going to be needed in the AI-enabled and emerging technologies world. So now we're talking about computational thinking. We've had schools talk about coding, and now here we are talking about artificial intelligence. And I think what might help to think about the recommendations we're making is to be a little bit more deliberate in talking about what exactly we mean. I mean, we're not really talking about middle schoolers developing high-end algorithms. We're not talking about higher math. We are talking about the kind of AI literacy that young people need to learn about, to understand that when they're interacting with an interactive toy that has a little bit of intelligence in it, what does it do? And how does it interact with you? So if I'm a child playing with a toy and it says, "My name is Emma. Hi, Emma, how are you today?" Maybe if I say, "Hi, my name is Gobbledygook," the child at a certain level can understand when that machine says, "Well, hi, Gobbledygook, how are you today?" Just simple things that children can learn and grow and develop that understanding, which is actually why I indicated earlier that this AI literacy that is needed right now to bring senior leadership in the federal government up to speed on capabilities and limitations and potential is a fixed-term problem to some extent for AI. Although, given that technologies emerge, there will always be something of new and emerging technologies that they'll have to understand. But eventually, we'll be graduating people from high school who will have an understanding of AI and its capabilities and limitations, and that will help. But right now, we're in this race with other countries, and it has significant implications for national security and quality of life. And I believe that we need to emphasize and prioritize in a way that we really haven't done so much since the end of World War II, quite frankly. So I do think it's important. I have to say the other thing is I'm really pleased to see that we're developing some bilateral R&D agreements. And as R&D agreements between countries develop, we can also hopefully work on collaborating on emerging educational needs bilaterally, multilaterally, will become more important over time. So you can tell I am passionate about it.
That's it for this week's podcast. I want to thank Jose-Marie for her time. If you want to learn more about the National Security Commission on AI, visit their website at www.nscai.gov. And remember, the singularity may not be near, but AI is about to change your world, so pay attention.